Yeah, the class today, rock solid site grading and Civil 3D. We're going to go through a lot of stuff in here. I'm going to give a little intro, a little agenda of what we're going to cover in a quick 60 minutes. And then I'm going to spend most of my time in the software. And I just want to give you a little background about myself. I know a lot of you guys, but some of you don't know me. I've been in AutoCAD and Civil 3D about 20 years. The first 10 years I was in production as a civil engineer. I did a lot of aviation design. In the last 10 years I've been a CAD consultant for CAD Technology Center out of Minneapolis. And lately, the last 10, 11 months, I've been the civil product manager for CTC software. And what I do is I design and I create productivity tools for within Civil 3D. I make a suite of tools called the Sim Project Suite, the Sim Manager Suite. A lot of you guys use them. If you haven't seen them, check them out. Good stuff. Definitely go check it out. So what are we going to talk about today? We're going to take a site and we're going to grade that. And we're going to start at fairly fundamental levels. And then we're going to get into some more advanced stuff. So don't take off if you're like, oh, I know how to do that thing with the feature line. We'll get to some more advanced stuff, and hopefully I've got something for everyone. Starting off with some grading fundamentals, we're going to look at some pond grading. That'll be arguably a more kind of novice level strategy for that. And then we'll get into some parking lot grading, some new tricks there using some of the more recent features in Civil 3D. And then some of the miscellaneous features you'd find around sites, around buildings, just kind of those odd areas. How do you handle that stuff? And then dealing with a subgrade surface. How do we create a dynamic, multi-depth parking lot subgrade surface? It's a strategy that's been around for a number of years, but I've seen a lot of people haven't heard of it yet, so I wanted to show it here today. So what are we going to use today? Nothing fancy. We're going to use feature lines. Anyone here not used feature lines? Don't be shy. Have you not used feature lines? All right, good. Because I'm not going to explain what it is and all that. We're going to skip past some of those basics. But it's how we use these feature lines, what the workflow is. And surfaces, of course, we're going to create. Those are the byproduct. So our main tool is feature lines. What we're not going to use are grading tools. They're very unstable. We're not going to use corridors. They're inflexible in a lot of different ways. Not going to use 3D polylines. They're really hard to edit. Polyline contours, it's 2019. Kogo points, it's really tedious and time consuming. We're not going to use that for this grading workflow we're going to do. I've taught site grading classes on corridors and a number of other things. What I'm trying to do here today is to take one of the simplest tools, feature lines, one of the most flexible tools, and give you some of the best workflows there are, at least that I've come up with within Civil 3D. So some of the main tools we're going to be using. If we're working with elevations, we're going to be talking about the quick elevation edit. If you don't know about this tool for feature lines, write it down. It should be one of your number one tools. Quick elevation edit. The elevation editor, it's a giant button. Most people are aware of it. There's way better ways to edit things, but when you're doing mass editing many vertices at a time, elevation editor is great. Elevations from surface, a really powerful tool. We'll use that a fair amount. And then setting a grade between 2 points. I want to hold a 2% between this vertice to another vertex 10 vertices down the line. Hold the 2% across all those without having to manually set each one. That's another great tool. If you haven't used that one, be aware of it. For geometry editing, we're going to use the stepped offset, pretty straightforward tool. And we're not going to do a lot of that here, but in terms of your geometry, it's just drafting the 2D polylines. We're here to do site grading though. So are most of these tools familiar? Raise your hand if you've used most of these tools. Okay? How many of you guys are pretty new to site grading, made a few feature lines, but kind of confused on the best way to go about it, right? Okay. So we got people at different levels. This is good. We'll start fairly basic. One of the things I want to talk about before we really get into it is what's called surface build order. Every time you do something, add a break line, a boundary to your surface, there's a history of what happens. This is a dynamic history. You can go and remove things, you can add things, you can change the order of the operations. There is a best practice for orders on how you build your surfaces. You should always start with break lines. Then go to major edits. I would call those things like height boundaries and outer boundaries. Then we look at minor edits, and we always try to minimize this, but this would be like swapping edges or deleting lines, those kinds of little things. And this list over here should always be understandable. I should be able to open my surface and understand the operations I've done. How many people have opened a surface definition and found like 10,000 operations, and it's like swap edge, delete line, add point, all this kind of stuff, right? How many people have graded that way, where they did 10,000 things to their surface, right? There's a better way. There's a better way, and I'm going to hopefully explain that today. This build order, we can edit this while we're grading. If I added a boundary and then I added more break lines, but the boundary should come after it, I can come in here and change that build order. Okay? So what's our approach to this? When you've got a site, you've often got a variety of components. There's a parking lot, there's a berm, there's this weird area over here that just needs to drain into the street, there's a pond, there's all these things. So you want to think in terms of components and come up with a strategy for each one of those features or components. And there's different strategies, some of them simpler, some of them more complex. We'll talk about some of those today. I aim to keep it all in one surface. My FG surface is one final surface. Okay, how I manipulate the feature lines to then be added to that surface, we might introduce some other surfaces, but I have one finished grade surface that I'm adding things together. You want to grade those components, that pond, that parking lot, and then wait till the end to start thinking about the weird miscellaneous areas in between, or the stuff around the building. Okay, attack the big major pieces that really affect your quantities and earthwork and so forth. Attack those first. So, a quick workflow. We're going to do some pond grading. Like I said, this is going to be kind of a beginner level type approach to it, but I just want to make sure we understand the basic use of these tools. So I start with creating a high water line or a top of a pond line with a polyline, and then I do some stepped offsets to generate benches for that pond. I can grab that entire set of feature lines and move it up or down if the height of it or the elevation isn't correct relative to my site. I then want to create a top of pond capacity surface and compare that to the pond surface itself to get my volume. What can my pond hold? Okay. Sound like a good place to start? Okay. So I'm going to attempt to grade an entire site in 52 minutes. Okay, I've got some pre-baked stuff here. I'm going to attempt to explain the workflow and key steps along the way. But as you can see, I got 7 drawings open here. I'm going to jump through things, show you the key stuff, and then say, okay, rinse, repeat times 20. Once we've done that, here's our result, okay? So pond grading, like I said, we're going to start with a top of pond or a high water line or something like that. And we're going to go, starting with that polyline, and turn it into a feature line. Really common tool, we're taking polylines, turning them into feature lines. Now the first thing right off the bat are sites. For all my main break lines or feature lines that go right into my finished grade site, I throw them all in the same site, in the main, I'm going to call it the main site. Okay. Another thing I like to do is I use styles in a very, very generic way. And I'll explain more in a bit, but the default will be to set the style to primary. And the other thing I like to do is to use selected entity layer, so that as I've drawn my horizontal geometry on particular layers, I just let the feature line land on that same layer, and the style itself just has layer bypassing, so it just picks up the layer. So it kind of behaves like a polyline. Okay, we're going to erase the existing entities and assign some elevations. And to start off with, just so we know where we are, I'm going to pull elevations from existing grade. Okay, now here's one of the great uses for elevation editor. The simple view where you get all the vertices in your feature line, and I use this for mass editing. I don't do point-by-point editing here. There's better tools for that. But I can look at and get a sense of my entire pond and have a starting point, right? Maybe you know the high water line, whatever it is, we're going to set this at some point. Okay, so I can do Control-All in there and set that all at once. I now have some kind of baseline. So one of the other key tools we're using is a stepped offset. So I'm going to offset to the inside here, go a slope of -10, -3 to 1 rather. Okay. We'll put another bench. We'll put a bench right in there. Okay. So stepped offsetting, a really basic tool we use to generate 3D offsets of feature lines. And at some point as I'm building this down, it's going to like offset onto itself. It actually does a pretty nice job of this. So depending on what the bottom of the pond should look like, I'll just let it kind of trim itself out. And it looks something like this. If I run a stepped offset, and we'll say, let's go 16 feet towards the inside, the slope of -3 to 1, it'll just kind of trim it out like that. Okay. Now this would be flat down here, so I can draw in basically a bottom of pond or a swale of sorts right here. Okay. And I'll turn that into a feature line as well. The other thing I like to do, with ponds, I like to think in terms of my main feature line and the other ones that are kind of more dependent on it. And so I'll use layering to control some of that stuff. So there's the primary, the secondary. There's some color difference. Hopefully you can see it. And it's as simple as this. And then I move on and we just put it right into the finished grade surface. Okay, the description you give it here, this shows up in that surface build order. We talked about understanding the build of our surface, right? Give meaningful descriptions to your sets of break lines you're putting into your surface. What are these numbers down here? How many people know what these are down here? Oh, we got to know what these are. These are really important. So generally we know what a surface is, right? It's a bunch of regular kind of triangles that connect to break lines we add to the surface. But how often does it triangulate? How much does it connect? Okay, this is pretty important to getting the right level of detail, but not too much detail in our surface. If I set the distance to 10, it means triangles are going to connect on straight segments at least every 10 feet. Okay? Once you see these triangles, it'll make sense. The mid-ordinate distance, this is about triangulation along a curve. Okay? This is basic geometry back to elementary school or high school, or I don't remember where. But the lower the value, the more it triangulates along a curve. This is really important because what's the number one thing that like PMs and people complain about civil 3D grading? The contours look like crap, right? This is one of your secrets to make the contours look less like crap. So know what these values are. Let's turn on our triangles as well. That's a straight segment right there. That distance is the help menu. .9755. Okay, it just divided that segment piece such that I didn't go over 10. What about along curves? Okay, it triangulated at that frequency such that the distance right there was no more than 0.1. Okay, most of you guys didn't raise your hand when I asked you if you knew what these are. You have to know how these behave. Your homework is go back, play with these values, add break lines, add them again. Go with the values up and down and understand what it's doing to your tin. This is one of the key parts of understanding how to site grade effectively, is to understand how this surface reacts to the break lines you add to it. A couple things we got to fix up here. This is supposed to be a swale of sorts. In the bottom here, these elevations aren't quite right. Okay, don't use this tool. We've got point-by-point editing tools. That's where quick elevation edit comes into play. Okay, if you're not using this and you only use this, start using this, quick elevation edit. And this is at, the way this works is I hover over a point, 821.27. I can change the slope, set that to 0, set that to 0. Everything's 821.27, okay? If you're not using quick elevation edit, you're welcome. We talked about how things triangulate, right? This looks like pretty decent triangulation, right? Enough to get the right detail. Contours are decent, but it's not like a bazillion triangles, so my drawing turns into 100 megs. But then your surface will start to do stupid things like this. Why is it doing that? And what would you normally do? Swap the edge, right? Okay, avoid all that, like what I call Band-Aid fixes to it. Don't swap the edge. Understand how this is behaving. These triangles connect to the nearest, so to speak, the nearest vertex that they can, right? So really what needs to happen is this line needs to go from here to there. Wouldn't a break line solve that? So here's where I introduce the concept of secondary break lines, and it's where I use the secondary feature line style. Secondary break lines are meant to control triangulation, but you don't edit them. I don't need to change this elevation here or here. I don't need a different feature line to be able to do that. Okay? I just need a break line to control the triangulation. So what does this look like? Just run the basic feature line command. Set this to secondary. I'll explain how that works in a second. Use the current layer, and then just snap to there. It prompts for elevation, accept the elevation, snap to the midpoint, okay, and then do the same over here. Grab them both, add to our surface. Okay, default your template to these values. 10.1, those are good values. Okay, and it does what I want it to. Now why do we do that, and why do we not swap an edge? Because it's a break line, and if I move the break line around, the tin moves with it, right? When you swap edge, it's this kind of Band-Aid fix to it. And then when you come next to it and throw a break line over that swapped edge, and then you delete a line, mysteriously you start getting holes in your surfaces. This weird stuff starts happening. Don't do the Band-Aid fix, the swap edge, the delete line. Do this instead. Okay. Now what does it mean to have chosen two different feature line styles? Raise your hand if you know what feature line style hierarchy is. Three people. Okay, this is a real cool thing. It's really hidden. When these two feature lines cross and they touch each other, which one controls? Well, normally it's like whatever one you edited last, but if I'm saying I don't want this one to ever control, how do you control that? If I go into my site and I right-click, this is what I mean by it's hidden, right-click on the feature lines category in your site and go to Properties. There's an Options tab in here called Feature Line Crossings Split Point Resolution. I don't even know what that means. It's feature line style hierarchy. Okay? Your styles are listed here. All feature lines with the style primary will control over the ones with the style secondary. It's kind of a weird thing. In fact, I knew it was there for a couple years and I never really thought about how to use it. This is a good way to use it. And the way it's advantageous is that I can put in break lines and I never have to manage their elevations because they're just connected to other break lines. And if those break lines move, those will just move along with it. So if I pick this feature line right here and I raise it up 0.5, okay, those just move right with it. Well, that seems pretty straightforward because I had a vertex on that one. But what about these? Normally, if I did a raise on this or lower, in fact, let's do a lower on this, -1, just to make it drastic, there's no vertex right here on this curve. That thing would be like stuck at the higher elevation. the feature line style hierarchy makes it pull all those vertices down. Is that making sense? Okay. Understand feature line style hierarchy, and definitely understand basic triangulation from your feature lines. It's really important to get decently looking surfaces so you don't have to do that terrible thing where we explode our surface and manually manipulate all the polyline contours, right? We're trying to avoid that. And it's possible. We just have to understand how Civil 3D thinks. Okay, those are the basics. Everyone with me so far? Okay, some of this is pretty basic for folks, right? They've done this kind of thing. Okay, maybe a couple new tricks there. We're going to move on to the parking lot. What's interesting about grading parking lots? So much detail, right? All these curb islands and things curving all over the place. It's got to drain this way and that way and all these things. But if you separate the horizontal geometry from the vertical geometry, it gets a little simpler. And what I mean by that is it's the horizontal geometry that's complex. But what's the vertical geometry? It can be fairly simple. Sheet drain to a catch basin here, sheet drain to a catch basin here. That's fairly simple if I don't have to think about the elevations at each and every curb point to make that happen. Okay? So what I'm going to introduce here is the concept of a setup surface or an auxiliary surface or a drainage surface. How many people have heard of this? How many people have used it? How many people have used it effectively? Okay? It's got its place, right? Okay, if my whole parking lot sheet drains one way, it's great. So what I'm going to do is show you how to use it, but then at some point you say, well, I can't control enough of it with that. And then we step away from it and we do more detailed grading. But I still think there's a good use for a setup surface to get you to at least 75% design. So those of you who've never seen it, I'm going to walk you through it here. Those of you who have, hopefully I've got a few new tips for you. So parking lots, we're going to create a drainage pattern with a setup surface. We're going to link the curb feature lines, which are those ones you saw there, to the setup surface. We're going to use a relatively new feature where you can make feature lines relative to a surface, such that if the surface changes, the feature line vertices will change with it. We're going to add those curb lines to the exact same finished grade surface we put the pond brake lines in. Remember those secondary brake lines we made? We're going to have to do a couple of those in here. And then for grading adjustments where we need to meet ADA requirements or volumes aren't what we want, we can adjust the setup surface, or I'm going to show you how to quickly break away from your feature lines, your curbs being linked to a setup surface, and maybe in an entrance area or by the building. I just want to manually grade that. But the rest of it can all sheet drain the way I want it to. Okay? And then we're going to run a slope analysis using a different surface style such that it will flag areas that are too flat, too steep for us, that kind of thing. So I'm going to do a lot of clicks here. I'm not going to say every click. Okay, the idea is not for you guys to write down every little click I do here. Get an appreciation of the workflow. Go back to your office and try it on your own. So a setup surface is a simple surface that defines a drainage pattern. And if it's a fairly simple site like this, I start with a rectangle. And what you want to do with it is to draw a rectangle that covers every vertex in your feature lines except where it has to tie into an existing. Okay? Now ideally we would control all these elevations with this setup surface, but again, like I said, we'll break away from it where we need to. Okay? I'm going to turn this thing into a feature line in a bit, but I also need more feature lines that represent swales and ridges in my parking lot. But what I'm doing is I'm ignoring a lot of the key little geometry points, these curb islands, this kind of stuff. I'm considering them for where swales or ridges go. So what it looks like, we start putting it together. And so you guys know this stuff when you're starting out on a site. You've done some analysis of the existing grade. Where does this need to drain to? Where is my pond, right? So where you put these start to dictate where, or based on rather, what kind of drainage pattern you need across and away from your parking lot. I'm going to leave it fairly simple because we have only so much time. But what I'm looking at is I'm draining towards catch basins at these curb islands here. Obviously, I'm draining away from the building here. I've got a tie-in over here. I've got a tie-in over here. Okay, there's a lot of little considerations beyond just this. But I can start to kind of panel out my parking lot and do it in ways that make sense, right? Down the center of a curb island. Maybe another one would go right along here, okay? The concept's the same, so you would likely put more grid lines in here than this. But the point, what's important here is that you guys understand the process. And what we want to do is we want to take these, turn them all into feature lines. And here's where we veer from the same surface and site. We're going to put these in a different site. We don't want these interacting with all of our primary grading feature lines. This is going to be a secondary or a different surface. So I've got a separate site called parking lot setup, and then they're going to be, sorry, I've used those terms interchangeably a little bit. They're going to be primary but within their own site. And then I'm going to assign elevations, and what I'm starting at is what we know for the building finished floor right now. It's 835, okay? What this setup surface represents is the gutter elevations or the pavement elevations in my parking lot. So we're going down a half a foot from that, assuming a half a foot curb. So 834.5. And it's just a starting point. I'm going to grab all of these.
You made an assumption, though, with the whole site that you knew what the building grade was.
Right. I got to start
You don't
somewhere.
always know.
I don't, but I'd have to start somewhere. Yeah. So there's some assumption. If that's still in flux, absolutely. But what we're trying to set up is something, a model that allows me to, when the architect changes that, every other day, I can respond to it more easily, right? Once a week, maybe. I used to do a lot of aviation grading, and it was along terminals, and I swear it was every other day. The building designer would be like, bring the terminal finished floor up 2/10. And then like 2 days later, it was down 2/10, and it drove me nuts. We're going to add or put these on a different surface, a parking lot setup surface. Same supplementing factors, okay. Now what I want to do is start to define sheet drainage regions within my site, okay. And what's really handy for this is to create feature line labels that label the spot elevations and the slopes on them. But the other thing we got to do is we've got to put some more vertices in here. So I'm going to do a little bit of this, and then we're going to jump forward to the pre-baked next drawing. So where these grid lines are crossing, we'd want common vertices like this. So down here, you want to insert common vertices like this, okay? And once you do that, then throw your labels on here, okay? And what I'm talking about is I've got some built in here, and it allows me to drop feature line labels on there. These are basic line and curve labels, such that it labels the end points and the slopes at the same time. And now when I'm working with a feature line, and I pick this and I go, yeah, put that at a negative 0.5, the elevations update for me. Okay, little regen, little refresh, okay. This makes site grading way faster, okay. They're kind of complicated label styles. If you guys want, I can send this drawing out and you can use these styles, good, okay. Really makes it easier. Do it on your ponds, throw those labels anywhere you want. Really helpful. Okay, pull the next drawing out of the oven. All I've done is I've gone through Quick Elevation Editor and I've started making edits to those where I started making decisions. Well, I'm assuming the building's here and we're coming here and we're sloping down at a negative 2%, okay? And that's going to be my low point. Up here we're coming down, and I might not even know, it's just preliminary at this point, okay? That's a negative 2.2. Okay, all the while my labels are updating, that grid surface is updating, I'm getting appreciation for the general sheet drainage pattern across my parking lot, okay? Now my goal for this is to be able to define all the elevations along these curb lines. That's what we're after here, or at least a 75% complete elevation starting point. Okay. The setup surface making sense so far? It's pretty simple, right? But you've got to think in terms of don't think in terms of this point right there at my back of curb, and then this point, and then this one. Think in terms of where am I draining to, where am I draining from, where do I have to tie in, right? What's the building at? Think of those kinds of things. Every site's different, right? So there's a lot of creativity there. Frankly, I think site grading is probably one of the hardest things in Civil 3D to do because every project is different, right? What do we do from here? Okay, I've got surfaces. This is where the tool to assign elevations from a surface really come in handy. So I'm going to do a few of these and then we'll kind of skip over doing all of them, but you'll get an idea of it. So if I pick my gutter line polylines, these are just polylines right now, and you'll notice I don't have my lip or my flag of curb. I'm ignoring that for the sake of this. Because most of the time it doesn't matter enough. It's not that we're not going to build it in there, but whether you do tip out or tip in curb, I don't necessarily need to account for that. You could, through the same strategy. I'd argue, we can do it after class, that you don't need that level of detail here. So let's pick all those gutter lines, and a strategy I always do is keep the gutter lines on a different layer than the top and the back of curb. Why? Because we're going to assign elevations from surface, but the pink ones are going to be a half a foot above the surface, the other ones are going to be right at the surface. I want to be able to select all those feature lines at once and attach them. So layering coupled with select similar work really nice. So turn them into feature lines. I'm going to put them in the main site, right? Okay, everything goes in the main site and the FG surface except for these like supplementary things we're doing, the setup surface. Okay, these are going to be primary. And I'm going to assign elevations, and here's where we're using one of the new features, not only from the parking lot setup surface, but I'm going to make it relative to it. I'll just put this in here for this reason, for this concept. Among others, this is one of them. And so I want to show you guys a way to take advantage of this. Relative to the surface, and I can put a value in there too. I'm not going to insert intermediate grade breakpoints because what would that do? It put in a ton of vertices at every little triangle crossing. I don't need that many points, so I'm going to leave that off. And what I end up with is all these red feature lines you see now. They have elevations, and if I look at elevation editor, those points are relative to the surface, except for the outside points that I left outside of my setup surface, so that those could simply be attached to existing ground. And those we're just using quick elevation edit, pick here, S for surface, select the existing grade surface, accept that, okay? Here's another built-in subcommand within the quick elevation editor. It's kind of cool. The reference command. So click R for reference. It says specify a reference point, okay? Now I'll specify a point. I'm sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. These aren't feature lines yet. I'll show you that in a minute. It's a cool little feature. So right now all the gutter lines, they're relative to the surface, and then I'll have set these points attached to existing, okay? You can,
Just to clarify,
yeah, go ahead.
relative to surface mean dynamic?
Yes, sorry, that wasn't clear. The question was, does relatives to surface mean dynamic? And absolutely it does. In fact, you'll see this grayed out here because it is dynamic in that way. Let's do a little experiment. Okay, this feature line this point is that point right there, right? Its elevation is 822.62. Okay, when I take this grid feature line, it'll affect those, and I'll just do it one so you can see it. I'm at a 1.833. Click on this, set it to a 2. Once I run this, you're going to see, those of you close up, that should update. $832.71. Okay, we change it 900ths. It's dynamic. Okay, that's kind of the important part of this. Now, before this feature was there, you could always just go back and grab the set of feature lines and reassign them from the surface. What Autodesk has done is they've added this dynamic relativity so that it automatically updates for you.
And that's only for 2020, not 2018.
No, it's Kyle, help me out. 19, 18? 18, okay. Yeah, since 18. And Wistot's all, you guys are all 18, right? Okay. Okay, making sense right now? We've made feature lines dynamic to or relative to the surface. What's different about the top of curb and the back of curb? Nothing, we just have a ½ a foot difference in relativity. So from objects, let's do that again, select similar. Got a bunch of feature lines I'm going to create at once. From objects, it's going to go into the main site. Okay, it's only those grid lines that go in the parking lot setup site. And then we're going to assign elevations relative to parking lot setup, and this time we're going to go up a ½ a foot. Gives me some information that says some of those things were outside of the surface. I've made them absolute elevation. Cool, that's what I wanted. Okay. Now some of the manual work you have to do is to add elevation points at those key high points or low points in your grid, right? I need to put an elevation point right here, okay? I need to do that at these different key points, okay? A little bit tedious, so I'm not going to do that 40 times in front of you. But once you run that, keep in mind that that new point I just made, it's not relative. So go grab all your feature lines again, and I want to show you a little trick with this. Once you've got feature lines created and you want to assign elevations to them or like relink them to the surface with new vertices you've created, you got to use this old AutoCAD command, otherwise you're picking like 20 feature lines on the screen. So here's the workflow. I pick one feature line and then I do select similar. Okay, now all of those are selected. Escape out of that, pick one of them again, and then go to elevations from surface. Okay, I come in here, yep, parking lot setup, it's 0.5 above that. And now normally we'd go and pick, but instead do multiple in the command line. And then here's where it doesn't even give you a subcommand, hit P for previous. P is your previous selection set. And when I do this, you're going to see all of these guys highlight. It's kind of hard to tell, but trust me, they all highlighted. Enter again, you'll see all those vertices highlighted. They're about to update all of them, and it reassigns all those vertices to the surface. Okay. Layering, select similar, use that stuff to your advantage. Why did I do that?
Yeah, why did you do that?
Because I've got,
What did you want to do?
yeah, so I didn't want to have to pick them all manually.
Oh, I see.
I got 30 of them or 20 of them or what. I don't have to go pick all the time. And every time I add, like, well, put another vertex in there. I want to make it relative to a surface.
Oh, I got
It's easier to just say, grab the whole set, make it all relative to again, so I don't have to think about it. It just does it for me.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, so this is all those feature lines with those extra vertices added in there. Okay. Once we have that, we move on to adding them to our actual FG surface. So I'm going to take the setup surface, turn that off, and I'm going to grab all of these add them into FG. So my curbs. Okay. Our favorite tool, Object Viewer. Okay. Gives us a nice visual anyway. How is that? Like crap. Kind of, sort of. Okay. You can start to see, right, our curb islands coming to life in there. Okay, even if we don't make those relative, even if I don't do that, getting me to some kind of 60-70% complete is it's really fast this way, right? So use it at least for that, even if you don't keep those things relative to the setup surface. I'd argue there's portions at least of your parking lot you'll be able to keep relative, and then other areas, and I'll show you this in a bit, you can break the link from the surface and then just say, like, well, this, I got to put a high point, I got to do something different in there, right? But here's what we don't have in this surface yet. I've got swales and ridges that come in here. So what should I do right through here? What do we do on the pond? The secondary feature line. I don't need to grade anything differently there. I have the surface data. I just need to throw a feature line in there that controls the triangulation. So it would look like this. Drawing a polyline right here, there, there, meant to have these on a different layer. Okay. Now I grab these two, I turn them into feature lines, and here's the key, I set them as secondary. Why do I set them as secondary? Read-only elevations. When I change these curb islands and I move those up and down, either manually or through the setup surface, I don't want to have to worry about what these feature lines that are really just controlling the ridges and swales in the parking lots. I don't have to worry about them. So take advantage of feature line style hierarchy and let those just float up and down with the surface and the primary feature lines. They're going to go into the main site. So the only interaction we have with the setup surface and site is by making vertices relative to the surface. But don't put the feature lines in the same site. When you want to veer away from the setup surface for more detailed grading, it's going to get you in trouble. If you could absolutely stick with the setup surface, controlling every elevation, you could throw them in the same site, but I just don't think that's realistic. So assign elevations from parking setup relative to that, and it's going to be 0. Add those into the surface, the FG surface, right? And now I'm starting to get swales, ridges that I'm after, okay? Now I'm not going to do it over and over to prove it to you guys, but, right, all these elevations are relative to the surface. Anything I do to these orange grid lines affect those curb lines right now. The gutter lines and the top and back of curb. I can sit here and this is like one big kind of clay model I can push and pull around now. What about when I'm not, actually I do want to show it to you once. The surface we see right now, the contours we see right now, those are the FG surface, not the surface that the orange feature lines are in. Let's do a few more edits to this just so we can see it interact. If I come here and do a negative 0.5, you'll see that FG surface responding. If I'm coming over here, doing a negative 2, okay, that FG surface, the curb island, everything is moving with it, okay? If all of our sites were just cookie cutter, we could just do that all day long and it'd be simple, right? But how do we start to break away from that? Maybe I need to bring this up a little bit. Screw the setup surface. I just need to pull that up some, right? And so what you do is you just run quick elevation edit. And when I do this, I'm going to keep this open so you can see what happens. If I run quick elevation edit on this point, it's 834.01. I want to go up to 834.5. That point just switched to absolute elevation. I just broke the link from the surface. Okay? Now here's the little extra tool I wanted to show you. I've got reference in here. If I'm changing that and I brought that up 5/10 or 3/10 or whatever I'm doing with it, I want those to respond in kind but be different by 0.5. Okay, I'm breaking the link from the surface. So now it's manual editing. But how quickly can we do that? Use the reference tool. It asks me to pick a reference point, this one, specify a point, this one, and now I can do D for difference, and I can do 0.5. I can now say that vertex relative to this vertex on a different feature line, make it 0.5. It's still manual editing, but it's a quick way to do it, and you don't have to think about 833.97, 834.47, like all these things. It's just 0.5, 0.5, right? Does that make sense? It's not dynamic. It's a one-time thing. There's no dynamicism between those points or feature lines. The only is that a word? The only dynamicism you get is between a feature line and a surface. Okay? You run quick elevation edit, and then you'll get a subcommand for reference. Pick that, and then it says reference point. So in this case, we'll pick this one now. Pick point. What's the difference? Well, in that case, it's 0.
So the points outside of your setup surface of the guy, would you do this, or would you use the surface, existing surface, and do a relative velocity?
So these out here, you're saying, that are outside the setup surface, those I just pulled elevations from existing surface. And you can do that right in the quick elevation command.
Yeah, but the other two curves.
Yeah, so these I haven't done, and so I should do that. I should run the reference right there, put it up 0.5, D for difference, 0.5, yeah.
You don't do the surface reference.
If your surface, your existing surface is perfect there, then do a surface reference. But I know mine's not perfect there.
It stays dynamic.
It won't stay dynamic. If it can only be dynamic to a surface. Yeah. Kyle?
Well, that point is,
Relative feature lines
Right, right. And to be clear here, what I'm doing right here with quick elevation edit, and then I have surface in the sub command, and then I'm picking EG. Okay, all of that, that's not making it relative. That's giving me a one-time read of the surface. But it's existing, it's not moving. Now I could go in there, I'm sorry, I can't go in there and have one vertex relative to one surface and another one relative to another. The feature line as a whole gets one relative surface up here. Then I can say which vertices actually respond to that or not.
Brian, do you have a guideline for going through the point by point the offsets versus the top face and top back versus just the offset, the third line?
You mean for,
There's 3 points, the quick elevation edit, and you reference the points. If you gotta do that for 12 points across the drop, would you use the point by point quick elevation edit, or would you rather re-offset the top face and top back?
there's some other tricks you could do. Like you could break the feature line right here and make that feature line, those curves relative to EG. You could put them in the same site and then make this feature line secondary and that primary. I think it's a lot of BS, right? There's other ways to get tricky with it, but we've got 8 minutes and there's only so much time for trickery. Let's move on a little bit. I want to quickly mention the analysis option. How do I know I have the right slopes on here? Use a slope analysis slope style, surface style rather. Do 3 ranges, spell out your 2 flat range, skip over your slopes are good range, 1 to 2%. Do a, well, 2 to 5, those might be good, depends on where it is, and then 5 plus, everything's entirely too steep. It shades where your problem areas are. And I can even add a slopes legend, 0 to 1, 2 to 5, here's the colors, here's the triangles, okay? Go and manipulate your grading surface, or if you're doing manual editing, right? And the triangles just disappear, right? So they disappear because I said 1 to 2%, don't color those. You could have them colored green or whatever you want to do, but the point is you're looking for like flat areas. I've got flat areas down here. Can I manipulate my setup surface to handle that? No, I got to do one of those overrides again. Okay, you might have to do that kind of stuff in entrances. That being said, there's no limit to what you put into your setup surface. I can put a feature line here, I can put another one, however you want to do it, right? What makes sense for you, it's going to vary from site to site. Okay, let's look at some of this miscellaneous grading. What about just grading limits out here? I'm going to move along kind of quickly with this. I'm going to draw a polyline. Maybe I've got hard-coded defined grading limits. Maybe it's not that defined. Okay. Turn this into a feature line. Put it in the main site, make it primary, and assign elevations from where? From EG, right? This is where we're tying in. And we can make it relative to EG as well. Now here's the thing, when I'm doing this, I don't like to insert all those extra elevation points automatically. I'll run this here, insert elevation point, and do an increment in something reasonable like 10 or 20 feet. And then I'll grab elevations from surface up here and reassign all those to EG relative by 0. Okay? So all of those are relative to the EG surface. Makes sense? And so if I move this around, right, those change with it. I simply add that to FG. What about the building? Grab that polyline I've got. Assign elevations. What's my starting point? Well, I know finished floor is 835. Let's start with that. Put this into the surface right away. So this miscellaneous grading, that's what we're talking about here. It's just about getting creative with what feature lines you're using. Okay. Use that same feature line to poke a hole in your surface. Do a hide boundary for the building to poke a hole in it. Okay. Same thing down here. Grab your feature line along your existing curb there, or wherever your grading limits are going to be. What about areas like this, little miscellaneous areas? I want to control some of the triangulation in here. Let's set it to secondary. Go from right here. Add that guy on the surface. Okay. Why does it start triangulating there? Remember surface build order? My boundary needs to be last. So here's what I'm talking about. Understand your history. Put your boundary last. Okay? So sometimes you throw in those break lines and you forget that you had a boundary in there. All right. One last step I want to show here. And if it's all right, I might go a couple minutes past 5. Is that okay? I promise it's cool. Creating a variable depth subgrade surface. It's a pretty straightforward process, but it's kind of a weird concept behind the scenes. We're trying to generate a subgrade surface for the parking lot that accounts for variable section depths. Maybe there's a heavy-duty pavement and a light-duty pavement where the section depth is different. I want to create this and I want it to be dynamic to FG. And I don't want to have to draw a bunch of feature lines and offset them and raise and lower them and add them in a different surface and all this kind of stuff. I'm okay with creating a few surfaces, but I want it to be dynamic. Here's what it looks like. Create some polylines that represent the regions for those different pavement areas. Okay? 12-inch subgrade and a 18-inch, okay? Put those into a surface. Subgrade depth, we'll call this. Okay. If I look at that surface, subgrade depth, we will add in those two polylines. And what do I get? If we look at this surface quickly, I get a surface with break lines in it that's equal to the elevation of those polylines. The elevation of those polylines have been set to the depth of the section. One is at 1 foot deep, or 1 foot, one is at 18 inches. There's that jump, okay? So we're making a surface out of polylines. This has a elevation of 1.5, the other one has 1, okay? Hang with me a bit. This is weird, right? Why would I be making break lines down at elevation 1, okay? Our next step, create a volume surface between FG and that surface. All a volume surface is a comparison of two surfaces. So tin volume, that's going to be the subgrade volume, And the base surface will be that subgrade depth, that thing that's down at 12 inches or 18 inches. And the comparison will be FG. And what do I end up with? This is where it's kind of cool. Let's grab the subgrade depth surface, subgrade volume surface, and FG, and look at those in Object Viewer, and we'll start to understand what we are creating. There's my surface way at the bottom, at elevation 12 inches and 18 inches. Here's FG. What's underneath it? A subgrade surface. So what is a volume surface? There is no thickness to it. It's simply the difference in elevations of two surfaces at a given point. Well, if I got a surface point up here at 832 and one at 1, right, my subgrade depth surface at 1, what's the difference between those? 831. Does that make sense? It's a weird way to use volume surfaces. But all I'm really after is a surface that is what? 18 inches less, or 1 foot less, or 2 foot less than my FG surface. This is all dynamic to FG, right? If the engineer comes back and says, no, it's a 2 foot section, go move that polyline to elevation 2 feet, and your subgrade surface will move with it. There's one other catch to it. This subgrade volume surface, you have to add that into a different surface. You have to paste it in. And the reason is because you can't compare a volume surface to a regular surface, because what are we after with this subgrade surface? I want to compare it to EG to get my common cuts and fills. Okay? So you simply make a new subgrade surface, and in that you use the paste surface command, and you drop in subgrade volume. Okay? I can now compare that to EG, and I can get a comparison of the two. Okay? Kind of makes sense? Kind of weird trickery?
That one was so far up there.
It's
At
simple.
5 o'clock.
It's as simple as this. Draw polylines at elevations that represent the depth. Make a surface. Compare that to FG. That'll give you your subgrade surface. Paste that into a regular tin surface so that it can be compared to EG to get those common cuts and fills less your import materials. Okay. Couple things concluding, guys. A lot of stuff I threw at you here. When you grade your sites, you've got to think about it a little bit. You got to plan first and then go grade the stuff. You want to strike a balance between flexible and dynamic. Dynamic is setup surfaces and parking lots. Flexible is just independent feature line editing. You want to minimize the number of feature lines and vertices. The more that you have, the more you have to manage and assign elevations. Always minimize that. And remember those break line factors. Think about how surfaces react to feature lines. This is really important. Your contours will look like crap if you don't have that. And always edit the source. Notice we didn't do any editing on the surface yet. This surface doesn't have any editing on it. And I've got a lot of nice triangulation and contours on it, okay? Like I said, avoid direct editing of those surfaces. Thanks everyone for watching. Your evals, be sure to fill out those. I will take questions now. People can ask them now, but I want to let everyone go so you can come up and ask me as well. If you want my contact info, there's cards up front here by the projector or on the screen. That's all I got for you guys. Thank you.
Drawing.